Hello and welcome, or welcome back to the Sales Enablement Festival. I hope you're enjoying the event so far because we've got even more great content heading your way. Remember to have your questions at the ready and get the tailored answers you need from the experts themselves. Thank you again to our sponsors and partners for helping us bring this event to life. Don't forget, if you're enjoying the content from the festival, be sure to check out the SEC membership plans. You can find more information about this over on the Sales Enablement Collective website. Sit back and enjoy the next talk. Hi everyone and welcome back to this next talk. This next talk is hosted by Grace Tang, who works in learning experience and strategy and also global sales and partner enablement over at Reddit. And she's going to talk to you all about hitting the reset button, sales narrative, launch tips from the field. I'd like to welcome Grace to the virtual stage. Ready for a talk?
Thanks, Jack, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. I'm a big fan of this community, and I'm happy to be here to share tips on something that many of you might have already done or you're about to do, and that is launching a new sales narrative to your entire sales org. In fact, some of you might be familiar with the concerns I heard when I joined the team last summer. I share these questions because they're not unique to Reddit and actually apply to many org-wide launches. Prior to Reddit, I heard the same concerns for 4 other large-scale narrative launches. One advantage of having led those launches was that I learned so much about what worked and what didn't work. One big caveat, however, is that not everything is one size fits all. But if you have a clear set of principles to help guide your decision-making, you can get closer to a relevant, effective, and hopefully impactful launch. Here are the principles that help drive my learning strategy and design choices. As a small but mighty team of 3, we co-created these values based on a shared vision to help our sales teams and partners achieve consistent and repeatable success. For every program, regardless of size, I always ask myself if I'm practicing these principles to some degree. To help tell the story of what we did for a narrative launch, I'll be sharing examples of each of these values. First, I'd like to share a few tidbits about our sales team at Reddit. At the time of launch, we had about 150 sales managers, client partners, and account managers across the US in large client, mid-market, and SMB sales. Today, we're over 200 and we're growing very quickly. Narrative training is essential for our new hires, and it continues to be essential as we evolve and expand into the UK, Canada, and other global markets. For the narrative launch, I started by uncovering our challenges and asking 3 design questions that helped define my goals. The first challenge was that because the narrative had been delayed and marketing was still working on messaging, some mystery started to build up, with our sales teams wondering if the new pitch would give them what they needed and whether they would be able to pitch it successfully. This led to my first design question, which was, how might we bridge the gap between sales and marketing to ensure holistic success? Another challenge was that the narrative launch needed to be part of our sales summit just 1 month away. And it also coincided with our plans to launch a new learning management system called WorkRamp. That design question that came up for me was, how might we work with this within this time frame while taking advantage of our new technical capabilities to scale learning? And last but not least, with so much focus on launching, how might we ensure there's continued reinforcement to support narrative adoption and practice? To meet these goals, it was critical to practice our first design value, which also happens to be one of Reddit's company values. If you've been on Reddit, you know that we're all about the human. We have over 100,000 passionate communities with 52 million daily active users that come to our platform for conversations they trust. For sales enablement, this value resonates perfectly with what we do, except in this case, the humans I needed to remember were all the client partners, account managers, and sales managers that needed our help to learn, practice, and deliver our new story with confidence. They were our core audience, and it was critical to ensure every learning experience and resource was relevant and useful to their day-to-day work. To put this value into action, here are some of the things I did pre-launch. To help dispel the mystery around the new narrative and also hear from people who were on how they were using the current pitch, I led discovery calls with a cross-section of managers and sellers. This allowed me to provide updates that people could share with their teams, and it was also a great way to hear what people needed in order to learn the new pitch. One key ask was for more digestible learning and more ways to learn from teammates based on real-life scenarios. Going into these calls, I also knew that much of our success would depend on empowering our sales managers as early as possible. More than anyone, I'm sure you'll all agree, managers have the greatest influence and impact on how people grow and develop. To help them start feeling comfortable, I worked with marketing to schedule narrative sneak previews. Another great outcome from these calls was recruiting some of our sales managers to be co-trainers and coaches so they could give effective, constructive feedback going forward. To get them ready, I led train-the-trainer sessions and created on-demand learning on how to give feedback. For the launch phase, this is what the learning path looked like for our sales team, starting with a narrative kickoff at our sales summit in mid-July. Because the summit was going to be the first time our client partners and account managers would see our new pitch in action, we knew it wouldn't be enough. To encourage more team learning, we led highly interactive workshops with client-based scenarios and small group breakouts. The group practice was a good start, but that wasn't all. To help people learn more about the narrative at their own pace, we launched on-demand learning in our new WorkRamp LMS, which we branded as Mission Control. Then to help drive individual practice, we assigned narrative challenges where each person submitted a short video pitch for manager feedback and certification. Now, some of you might be wondering how we were able to get people to do the online certification. While it's true that our EVP helped set this as an org-wide priority and requirement, we also deliberately scoped the certification and challenge in a way that was fair, achievable, and consistent. Because we knew people would have to prep for client calls anyway, we encouraged them to use a challenge as a practice run for a real-life opportunity. Another thing we knew was that no client enjoys being held hostage to long pitches. So we asked our sales teams to keep their videos to 4 to 6 minutes. And we also scoped the manager scorecard to focus on 5 elements that would be achievable within that time frame. For every step of this learning path, we constantly asked ourselves and our partners if we were remembering our sellers and what they needed to learn in order to learn our narrative. As we worked to understand what people needed, we also had to think about what our business needed. By launching a new narrative, what were the key business and performance goals that we needed to meet? And how could we measure success to ensure strategic alignment? To answer these questions, I worked with our EVP of sales, our heads of large client and growth sales, as well as marketing. Because these stakeholders had seen their fair share of narrative launches fall short, one question they asked was whether they could just release a new deck and have our teams take a test to certify. I'm smiling because this wasn't the greatest starting point, but I was glad they asked because it allowed me to dig deeper into their business priorities. It also gave me an opportunity to share my experience and help educate them on what we could do to get closer to the outcomes they were looking for. Walking them through our proposed learning path was also key because it led to really good discussions about how to launch in a way that made sense for our sales teams. The more that I showed prototypes of the learning experience, the more they felt and sounded comfortable as executive sponsors and champions. It was also through these discussions that we agreed on how to evaluate and report on key outcomes. Since the workshops, on-demand learning, and certification were significantly different or new for our sales teams, we agreed to measure people's reactions to see how we could improve for future launches. We also decided to track certification completions, which was our EVP's biggest concern. Of these metrics, the 95% certification was by far our EVP's favorite because it was so much higher compared to past experiences. And as he likes to tell it, the true certification was closer to 99% because some of our sellers were on leave during the launch period. These outcomes really inspired him to celebrate our teams, not just in sales meetings, but in company and board meetings. The next driver in our decision-making was scalability. With all of our teams going remote due to COVID, and the likelihood that this would be the new normal, it was more important than ever to think about how to give people more choice, autonomy, and ease in how they learn. To scale everything we needed to do, we saw a huge opportunity to use and time the launch of our WorkRamp LMS, which we branded as Mission Control. Through testing and planning, we were able to use Mission Control to support many of the blended learning opportunities we wanted to offer. We could track workshop registrations to create breakout groups. We could assign and track people's progress on their e-learning and video challenges, and we could assign our sales managers to view and score video pitches right in Mission Control. Another bonus that came from asking people to submit video pitches was we now had a channel for collecting top scoring pitches, which we later converted into a narrative showcase library so more people could get inspiration from their peers. Just by asking people to practice and put their best foot forward, we were not only able to scale peer-to-peer learning, but celebrate people's efforts. Since some of my examples are specific to our LMS, some of you might be wondering if your own platforms and tools are up to the task of launching a blended learning and certification program such as ours. If I deleted all the mentions of Mission Control from this slide, I would say the same basic principles still apply. No matter what kind of tools you have for creating and hosting learning, it's always best to test as early and as often as possible so you can determine what's feasible and achievable for your launch. Then you need to ask yourself, what are the most important needs and outcomes that matter to your audience and stakeholders? If tracking attendance is important and your LMS doesn't offer event registrations, then you might have to plan for something like a Google form. If your platform allows you to assign and track e-learning, but video challenges aren't possible, does it then make sense to create toolkits and scorecards for managers to facilitate group practice in their team meetings? Or would it be more practical for them to shadow actual client calls and give one-on-one feedback? If certification and getting demos are critical, does that mean letting people choose to certify live with their manager or recording videos with common tools like Zoom or Google Meet? And for managers, does that also mean creating a Google form they can use as a scorecard? These are all questions I've had to ask myself when I've had fewer resources for other launches. It wasn't ideal, but at least I could feel confident about my choices because I did the work to test and negotiate based on time and resources. So far, I've talked about remembering the humans on our sales teams, working with our sales leaders and partners to ensure strategic alignment, and maximizing the tools and resources you have to scale learning. If your team is small like ours and you work in sprints, it can be very easy to go with your own assumptions or preferences. But you could also miss out on a whole range of perspectives and solutions that might make your partnerships and programs stronger. For the narrative launch, being inclusive took shape in a few different ways. Earlier, I shared how leading discovery calls with our sales teams and aligning with our sales EVP and marketing team helped me design better experiences. What I didn't mention and would like to add now is how important these interactions were for building trust. Even though I couldn't promise to do everything everyone wanted, they understood and appreciated having a voice to help shape our strategy and outcomes. Practicing inclusiveness also had a lot of impact on the learning experience itself. To encourage more cross-pollination between teams and roles, we invited people to attend any workshop, and we also created mixed breakout groups so people could chat with others they wouldn't normally see every day. Even though it was common to record past trainings, our sales managers and I also made a conscious decision to not record the workshops because we wanted to create a safe space for people to talk and practice the new narrative for the first time. Something else that's subtle but always important to consider is whether you're fairly representing all the different and successful ways that people might approach their narrative. I'm especially proud of how our narrative showcases top scoring pitches from across large client and growth sales. It also includes client partners, account managers, creative strategists, and our friends on the agency development team. Our last value, innovation, is one of those popular values that can be tricky because I've seen teams and entire companies get bogged down by the novelty of new ideas and tools that take longer to execute and deliver at the cost of delivering more immediate value to teams and customers. On our team, we define innovation in terms of our audience. We're not fans of innovation for innovation's sake. But if we're innovating in a way that helps people engage and learn more effectively, we consider that a win. For many of our sales managers and teams, the narrative launch was different in ways that might seem standard elsewhere, but were actually pretty novel for our team. For the first time, the Reddit sales team was going to get their own learning portal, but we needed to be selective. We focused on prototyping the most important experiences to support learning and practice first. Another first was changing the options in how people learned. We broke away from lecture-based training by designing interactive workshops, and we offered more self-serve avenues to learn and practice through e-learning and video challenges. Post-launch, there were other opportunities to innovate. As word got out about our sales team success, we got invited to create a narrative reel of our top pitches for our company's SNU Summit. This was a really fun way to showcase and celebrate not just our sales team, but our new story with the rest of Reddit. Another interesting development was that we got requests from other teams like business development that weren't required to certify on the narrative, but wanted to opt in because the learning path was self-serve and achievable. So this was the story of our narrative launch, and these are the values that drove our enablement strategy and design choices. Now that you've heard our story, I invite you to think about the story you might want to tell the next time you launch a new narrative or any other initiative. And to help you create that story, I really encourage you and your team to consider which values inspire and motivate you most, and how those values serve your charter and mission. Having a core set of values really fueled our ability to move quickly and thoughtfully in order to develop and support our sales teams. And whether you have a new sales narrative to launch or not, I wish you all the best on your next launch. And I can't wait to hear your success stories at the next festival. Thank you. So I'm just checking to see if there are any questions in the chat. So does anyone have a narrative that's coming up that maybe we can brainstorm together on? Okay, Christine, so you have a new narrative and demo cert? I think one thing to think about is I've seen narratives that can be really quite long and epic. And so I always encourage people to think about scoping it because I've often seen, even for cert, it could be really, really onerous to ask people to learn, let's say, a 40-slide deck and then be able to certify on that. It's tough on the managers because the scorecard is probably out of control, and it's definitely harder on the sellers. And really the most important thing at this moment when someone is trying to learn how to tell a new story is to really think about what they need. Again, remember the human. People don't want to fail. And so really trying to encourage them to have that safe space to practice and trying to scope it, or even phasing all the different milestones, can make a huge difference in how they feel about the training. I see my teammate Ashley is in the chat, and one thing she knows I often like to talk about is that in enablement, we can teach people what they need to know. We can even show them how to do it, but how they feel about the learning, that's much harder to achieve. And so the more that you can think about what they need and be realistic and pragmatic about it, and in some ways, there are times you're going to have to fight really hard for your people. You may have a lot of stakeholders that have very strong feelings and opinions, but that's the reason why discovery calls matter, because you have evidence, you have data to support your decision making, and it gives you leverage in order to negotiate with the sales managers and leaders and stakeholders. Because ultimately, it's all about everyone learning to tell a story so that we can impress our clients and drive business. And if we can really align those pieces, I think it will pay out better for the learners. Christine, thank you for sharing that. So you have something similar to mission control. Okay. And I really want to point out that it might be challenging at times to find, a platform that does everything. Frankly, I've been doing this a long time. I have yet to find a platform that does everything. Maybe there's a sponsor at the festival that does that, but I think it's really important to test your platforms as much as possible, and then make a decision based on the functionality. That's something I highly encourage everyone to do. And I don't think you should get wrapped around the axle about how cool your platform is, because in the end, we found a lot of value in just straightforward, highly interactive instructor-led training. And I would also suggest resisting the temptation to go all on demand. I've also seen people swing the other way to go all on demand. And I would say, think about this. If someone has to learn how to tell a story, are they really going to learn that by taking an e-learning course? Probably not. So I highly recommend thinking about mixing all of the modalities of learning, because you increase the chances that you might be able to help people get there faster.
Hi, Grace. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jack.
Well, that we crashed out again. So I believe we are halfway through the Q&A. I did have a question for you, which I've asked kind of all of our speakers before. I'd love to get your input as well. The question is simply, what tips do you have for someone who is new to an enablement role?
I think in the end, it's really about the audience. I'm an instructional designer by trade, and sometimes people come at me with a lot of models. Like, this is a pedagogical theory about how adults learn. And I would say, look at your audience, take some time to get to know them better, because really the more that you understand what they care about, what drives them, what helps them perform well in their jobs, that will really help you get the edge. If you talk too much about the theory or the concept around, well, we really should be doing this, but you're not aligning it with the context or what people are really experiencing in their day-to-day, I think there could be the danger of a miss there. So if you're starting out in enablement, get to know your teams. I've always loved sitting in the bullpen with all the sellers. I am a shameless eavesdropper. I love to listen to every conversation, because it gives me insight into some of our best sellers, our best account managers. And I think the more time you spend with salespeople up front, I think that will actually help accelerate your work.